The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training grounds as Sarah Martinez adjusted her gear one final time. Her hands moved with practiced precision, checking each piece of equipment that would help maintain her cover. Today marked the beginning of the most important mission of her career, though none of the soldiers around her would ever suspect the truth. At 28, Sarah had already spent 8 years as one of the Navy's most elite SEALs. She had completed missions in hostile territories that most soldiers could only imagine in their worst nightmares. Her record was spotless, her skills unmatched, and her dedication absolute. But today, she wasn't Sarah Martinez, decorated SEAL officer. Today, she was just another new recruit, named Sam Martin, fresh out of basic training and nervous about fitting in. The deception had taken months to plan. Military intelligence had received troubling reports about a training facility that was supposed to be producing the next generation of elite soldiers. Instead, whispers suggested something far more sinister was happening behind the walls of Camp Thunder Ridge. Recruits were disappearing, training accidents were becoming suspiciously frequent, and several families had reported their children missing after being stationed there. The Pentagon needed someone on the inside, someone who could blend in seamlessly while gathering evidence. Sarah had volunteered immediately when the mission briefing reached her unit. She had grown up with 3 younger brothers and knew how to hold her own in any crowd. More importantly, her slight build and youthful appearance made her perfect for the role of a nervous new recruit. The transformation hadn't been easy. Sarah had to suppress years of advanced training, forcing herself to stumble through basic exercises that she could perform flawlessly in her sleep. She practiced looking confused during weapons demonstrations, asked simple questions about equipment she could disassemble and reassemble, blindfolded, and most challenging of all, she had to appear intimidated by situations that she had mastered years ago. Her cover identity was carefully constructed. Sam Martin came from a small town in Ohio, had joined the military to pay for college, and had barely scraped through basic training. On paper, Sam was unremarkable, forgettable, and exactly the type of recruit who might be overlooked if something terrible happened. As Sarah walked toward the main building of Camp Thunder Ridge, she observed everything with the trained eye of a professional, while maintaining the wide-eyed expression of someone seeing a real military facility for the first time. The base looked normal enough from the outside. Standard buildings, regulation equipment, and the usual bustle of military life. But something felt wrong, though she couldn't put her finger on what it was yet. "Fresh meat," called out a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see a group of 5 soldiers approaching, their expressions ranging from amused to hostile. The one in front, a tall man with sergeant stripes and a cruel smile, seemed to be their leader. "Look what we got here, boys." Another baby-faced recruit, who probably cries for mommy every night. Sarah forced her shoulders to hunch slightly and let her voice take on a higher, more uncertain tone. "I'm just looking for the check-in building, sir. This is my first day and I don't want to be late." The soldiers burst into laughter. The sergeant stepped closer, close enough that Sarah could smell the coffee on his breath and see the small scar above his left eyebrow. In her real life, she would have assessed him as a potential threat and calculated the exact moves needed to neutralize him if necessary. Instead, she took a small step backward and let her eyes dart nervously between the men. "First day, huh?" the sergeant continued, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Well, let me give you some free advice, kid. This isn't basic training anymore. This is the real deal. And if you can't handle it, you better pack up and go home before someone gets hurt." One of the other soldiers, a stocky man with arms covered in tattoos, chimed in. "Yeah. We had 3 recruits wash out just last week. Poor kids just couldn't handle the pressure. One of them even had a complete breakdown during a routine exercise." Sarah filed this information away while maintaining her nervous act. 3 recruits in 1 week seemed excessive, especially for soldiers who had already completed basic training. She needed to learn more about what had happened to them, and whether they had simply been discharged, or if something more sinister had occurred. "I can handle it, sir," she said, allowing a slight tremor to enter her voice. "I really want to serve my country and prove that I belong here." The sergeant laughed again, but this time, there was no humor in it. "Prove you belong? Kid, you look like you'd have trouble opening a can of beans, let alone handling military operations." Tell you what, though. Since I'm feeling generous today, I'll give you a chance to show us what you're made of." Before Sarah could respond, the sergeant grabbed her by the arm and started pulling her toward a nearby building. The other soldiers fell in behind them, their boots echoing ominously on the concrete pathway. Sarah allowed herself to be led while mentally cataloging every detail of their route and the layout of the buildings they passed. They entered what appeared to be a training facility, though it was unlike any Sarah had seen before. The equipment was standard enough, but something about the atmosphere felt wrong. The lighting was too harsh. The walls were lined with motivational posters that seemed more like threats than encouragement. And there was an underlying tension that made her professional instincts scream warnings. "All right, Martin," the sergeant said, releasing her arm with enough force to make her stumble slightly. "Let's see how tough you really are. We're going to run you through a little initiation exercise. Nothing too fancy, just some basic obstacle course work and maybe a little sparring to see what you're made of." Sarah's mind raced as she evaluated the situation. This wasn't standard protocol for new recruits, and the enthusiasm of the soldiers suggested they were looking forward to something that had little to do with legitimate training. She needed to maintain her cover while gathering intelligence, but she also needed to be prepared to defend herself if things went too far. "Is this really necessary, sir?" she asked, trying to sound both confused and worried. "I was told to report to the main office for processing and orientation." "Oh, you'll get there eventually," said the tattooed soldier, his grin revealing teeth that had seen too much tobacco. "But first, we need to make sure you're really cut out for this place. Can't have weaklings dragging down the whole unit, you know?" The sergeant walked over to a wall lined with various pieces of equipment and selected what appeared to be a modified training vest. It was heavier than standard gear and seemed to have additional weights attached to it. "Put this on, recruit. Let's see how you handle a little extra load." Sarah slipped into the vest, immediately calculating its weight and how it would affect her movement. It was significantly heavier than necessary for basic training, probably designed to exhaust recruits quickly and make them more vulnerable to whatever came next. She let her knees buckle slightly under the weight and grabbed onto a nearby rail for support. "Too heavy for you already?" laughed another soldier. "Maybe you should have stayed home and let the real soldiers do their job." "I can do it, sir," Sarah said through gritted teeth, genuinely needing to adjust to the unexpected weight distribution. "Just give me a second to get used to it." The sergeant pointed toward an obstacle course that had been set up in the center of the room. It was more complex than anything typically used for new recruit training, with walls to climb, ropes to navigate, and obstacles that required significant upper body strength to overcome. More concerning were the modifications that made the course unnecessarily dangerous. Sharp edges that could cause serious injury, unstable platforms that could result in falls, and spacing that pushed the limits of what was physically possible. "You're going to run this course 3 times, the sergeant announced. "If you can't complete it, or if you quit before finishing all 3 runs, then you're obviously not fit for service here and we'll make sure you get transferred somewhere more suitable for your abilities." Sarah realized this was likely how recruits were being eliminated from the program. The excessive physical demands, combined with the dangerous modifications to standard equipment, could easily result in injuries that would require medical discharge. Worse, if recruits were pushed beyond their limits, in an environment where safety protocols were ignored, accidents could be made to look like training mishaps. She approached the starting line of the obstacle course, forcing her breathing to become shallow and rapid, as if she were already panicking about the challenge ahead. In reality, she was analyzing each component of the course and planning the most efficient route through it, while making it appear difficult enough to satisfy her audience. The first obstacle was a rope climb, followed by a horizontal traverse across monkey bars. Sarah grabbed the rope and began to pull herself upward, deliberately making her movements look awkward and strained. She had completed similar climbs hundreds of times during her SEAL training, often while carrying much heavier equipment and under enemy fire, but she forced herself to struggle and pause multiple times, as if the weight of the vest was overwhelming. "Come on, Martin," shouted one of the soldiers. "My grandmother could climb faster than that, and she's been dead for 10 years. Sarah reached the top of the rope, breathing heavily from the genuine effort of making the climb look more difficult than it was. She moved to the monkey bars, deliberately missing her grip on the third bar and dropping back to the starting position with a convincing cry of frustration. "Already failing, rookie?" called out the sergeant. "Maybe you should consider a career in accounting instead." On her second attempt at the monkey bars, Sarah made it halfway across before allowing her grip to slip again. She landed hard on the mat below, letting out a genuine grunt of pain as the weighted vest drove the breath from her lungs. The soldiers were clearly enjoying her apparent struggles, and she filed away their reactions for later analysis. The course continued with a series of increasingly challenging obstacles. Sarah navigated each one with carefully calculated difficulty, always appearing to be at the edge of her capabilities while actually maintaining complete control of the situation. She stumbled over hurdles, struggled with balance beams, and made multiple attempts at wall climbs that she could have completed effortlessly under normal circumstances. By the time she finished the first run of the course, Sarah was genuinely tired from the effort of making everything look harder than it was, combined with the additional weight she was carrying. Sweat dripped from her forehead, her breathing was labored, and her muscles ached from the unusual strain of holding back her natural abilities. "One down, 2 to go," announced the sergeant with obvious satisfaction. "Think you can handle it, or are you ready to admit you don't belong here?" Sarah wiped sweat from her face with the back of her hand and looked up at him with what she hoped was determination mixed with exhaustion. "I can do it, sir. I won't quit." The second run of the course was more challenging, not because the obstacles had changed, but because Sarah's muscles were genuinely fatigued from the unnatural movement patterns she was forcing herself to maintain. She pushed through each obstacle with grim determination, allowing herself to fail at certain points, where it would look natural, while ensuring she never failed so completely that the exercise would be terminated. During the second rope climb, one of the soldiers moved closer to the base of the rope and began shaking it while she was halfway up. The unexpected movement nearly caused her to lose her grip for real, and she had to call on her actual training to maintain her hold while making it look like pure luck had saved her from falling. "Having trouble, recruit?" called out the soldier below. "Maybe you need some help concentrating." Sarah completed the second run with what appeared to be her last reserves of energy. She collapsed on the mat at the finish line, breathing heavily and letting her entire body shake with apparent exhaustion. In reality, she was using the time to observe the soldiers more carefully and listen to their conversations when they thought she wasn't paying attention. "She's tougher than she looks," she heard one of them say quietly to another. "Most of them quit after the first run." "Don't worry," replied his companion. "The third run usually does the trick, especially with the modifications we make during the break." Sarah's attention sharpened immediately. Modifications during the break suggested that the course was being made even more dangerous for the final run. She needed to be prepared for whatever they had planned while maintaining her cover and gathering evidence of their activities. As she lay on the mat pretending to recover, Sarah began to understand the true scope of what was happening at Camp Thunder Ridge. This wasn't just a training facility with poor safety standards. This was a systematic program designed to eliminate recruits through what could later be reported as training accidents or voluntary withdrawals. The question was why, and who was ultimately responsible for ordering these activities. The sergeant walked over to where she was lying and looked down at her with an expression that mixed amusement with something much darker. "Ready for round 3, Martin? Because this is where things get really interesting." Sarah pushed herself up from the mat, every movement carefully calculated to show exhaustion while keeping her senses sharp for whatever was coming next. During the break, she had watched the soldiers make adjustments to several obstacles on the course. Rope tensions had been altered, safety mats had been moved, and she noticed fresh grease on several handholds that would make gripping nearly impossible for most recruits. The modifications were subtle but deadly. What had started as an unnecessarily difficult training course had been transformed into something that could easily result in serious injury or death. Sarah realized she was witnessing the method by which recruits were being eliminated from the program, and possibly from life itself. "Feeling ready, Martin?" the sergeant asked, his voice carrying a tone that suggested he already knew what the outcome would be. "This final run is what separates the real soldiers from the pretenders. We've made a few adjustments to help you reach your full potential." Sarah nodded weakly, allowing her hands to tremble slightly as she approached the starting line. Behind her facade of nervous determination, Her mind was working at full capacity, analyzing each modified obstacle and planning how to navigate the dangers while maintaining her cover. The first obstacle was the rope climb. But now the rope hung differently. The tension had been reduced, making it more likely to sway unpredictably. And the surface had been treated with something that made it slippery. For an exhausted recruit with limited upper body strength, this would be nearly impossible to complete safely. Sarah began her climb, immediately feeling the difference in the rope's behavior. She allowed herself to slip several times, each recovery looking more desperate than the last. As she climbed higher, she could hear the soldiers below making bets on whether she would fall before reaching the top. $20 says she doesn't make it past halfway, one of them called out. You're on, replied another. But I give her 30 seconds before she hits the mat. Sarah reached the halfway point and paused, hanging from the rope and breathing heavily. Below her, she could see the soldiers watching intently, their expressions ranging from anticipation to something that looked almost hungry. This wasn't about training anymore. They were watching a spectacle, waiting for her to fail in a way that would provide them with entertainment. She continued climbing, fighting against the modified rope's tendency to twist and sway. Near the top, her hand encountered a section that had been deliberately frayed. Sharp fibers bit into her palm, and she had to suppress a wince of real pain while making her struggle look like simple exhaustion. The descent was even more treacherous than the climb. The rope's reduced tension made it impossible to control her rate of descent using normal techniques. Sarah had to call on her advanced training to find alternative ways to slow her progress while making it appear that she was barely maintaining control through pure determination. When her feet finally touched the ground, several of the soldiers looked disappointed that she had survived the first obstacle. The sergeant's expression had grown noticeably darker, and Sarah realized that her unexpected success was not what they had been hoping for. Lucky break, rookie, he said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe in luck. Let's see how you handle the rest of it. The next series of obstacles had been modified in ways that were less obvious, but equally dangerous. Balance beams that had been stable during her previous runs now wobbled unpredictably. Wall climbing holds that had been secure were now loose, ready to give way under pressure. Even the safety mats had been repositioned so that they no longer provided adequate protection for falls. Sarah navigated each obstacle with increasing difficulty. Not because her skills were failing, but because the course itself had become genuinely dangerous. She had to use every technique in her arsenal to avoid serious injury, while making her success look like a combination of luck and stubborn determination rather than professional expertise. During a particularly challenging traverse across unstable platforms, Sarah deliberately allowed herself to fall in a controlled manner that would look accidental. She hit the mat with enough force to drive the air from her lungs and send a sharp pain through her shoulder, but the alternative would have been to reveal her true abilities by completing the obstacle with obvious ease. Getting tired, Martin? Called out the sergeant, though there was less amusement in his voice now. Maybe you should consider calling it quits before something really bad happens. Sarah pulled herself to her feet, genuinely shaken by the fall but more determined than ever to complete the mission. She was beginning to understand that the recruits who had disappeared from Camp Thunder Ridge hadn't simply washed out of the program. They had been systematically eliminated through a process that was designed to look like training accidents or voluntary withdrawals. I'm not quitting, sir, she said, her voice carrying a note of defiance that wasn't entirely acting. I came here to serve my country, and that's what I'm going to do. The final obstacle was a rope traverse across a gap that had been widened since her last attempt. The rope itself appeared to be the same, but Sarah's trained eye caught subtle signs that it had been weakened. Strands were beginning to separate under tension, and the anchor points showed stress marks that suggested they might not hold under the full weight of a climber. As she approached the starting point of the traverse, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of attempting to cross the rope in the standard manner, she deliberately stumbled and fell to one knee, crying out as if in pain. This gave her the opportunity to examine the rope more closely without appearing to do so. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. The rope had been deliberately sabotaged. Several strands had been partially cut, leaving them intact enough to support a climber initially but designed to fail once full stress was applied. Anyone attempting to cross this obstacle would fall. And from this height, Serious injury or death would be almost certain. Having problems, recruit? Asked the sergeant, moving closer to where she knelt. Maybe this is your body's way of telling you that you don't belong here after all. Sarah looked up at him with what she hoped appeared to be pain and frustration. I think I twisted my ankle, sir. Could I have just a minute to see if I can work it out? The sergeant's expression shifted slightly, and for a moment Sarah thought she saw something that might have been disappointment. Take your time, Martin, but remember, if you can't complete the course, then you've failed the test. And failure here has consequences. While pretending to massage her ankle, Sarah continued her examination of the obstacle setup. The sabotage was professional and systematic, designed to create what would appear to be an unfortunate accident during training. She realized that she was looking at a murder weapon disguised as exercise equipment. The implications hit her like a physical blow. How many recruits had been killed using methods like this? How many families had been told their children died in training accidents when they had actually been murdered? And most importantly, who was ordering these killings and why? Sarah made her decision. She couldn't complete this obstacle without either revealing her true abilities or risking her life unnecessarily. But she also couldn't simply quit without arousing suspicion. She needed to find a third option that would allow her to maintain her cover while avoiding the trap that had been set for her. Standing up slowly, she tested her weight on her ankle and winced convincingly. I think I can make it, sir. I just need to be careful. She approached the rope traverse with visible hesitation, reaching up to grasp the rope while staying close enough to the starting platform that she could quickly return to safety if needed. As her hands closed around the rope, she immediately felt the weakness in the fibers that confirmed her analysis of the sabotage. Come on. Martin, called out one of the soldiers. Stop stalling and show us what you're made of. Sarah took a deep breath and began to move out over the gap. Knowing that she was putting her life at risk, but also knowing that she needed to gather more evidence of what was happening here. She had moved only a few feet when the rope began to show signs of stress. Fibers started popping audibly, and the entire rope began to sag under her weight. At that moment, a new voice cut through the tension in the room. What the hell is going on in here? Everyone turned to see a tall woman in officer's uniform standing in the doorway. Her rank insignia identified her as a major, and her expression suggested she was not pleased with what she was observing. The soldiers immediately snapped to attention, their earlier confidence evaporating in the presence of superior authority. Just running a new recruit through orientation, Major, said the sergeant, though his voice had lost its earlier swagger. Standard training protocol. The major's eyes swept over the modified obstacle course, taking in details that a trained officer would immediately recognize as dangerous deviations from proper procedure. Her gaze lingered on Sarah, still suspended over the gap on a rope that was clearly failing under stress. Get that soldier down from there immediately, ordered the major. And I want a full report on why standard safety protocols are being ignored in this facility. Sarah carefully made her way back to the starting platform, relieved to have solid ground under her feet again, but also frustrated that her investigation had been interrupted just as she was gathering crucial evidence. As her feet touched the platform, the rope finally gave way completely, falling into the gap below with a sound that left no doubt about what would have happened if she had been in the middle of the traverse. The major walked over to examine the failed rope, her expression growing darker with each detail she observed. Sergeant, explain to me how a piece of equipment in this condition was being used for recruit training. The sergeant's face had gone pale as he realized the implications of what had just happened. Ma'am, the equipment was inspected this morning and found to be in good condition. This must be a sudden failure. Sudden failure? The major picked up a piece of the broken rope, clearly showing the cut fibers that had been hidden beneath outer strands. This rope has been deliberately sabotaged, which means someone in this facility is attempting to commit murder disguised as a training accident. Sarah watched the exchange with fascination, realizing that her mission had just taken an unexpected turn. Either this major was genuinely unaware of what was happening at the facility and could be an ally, or she was part of the conspiracy and was now engaged in damage control. Either way, Sarah needed to be prepared for whatever came next. The major turned to address Sarah directly. Soldier, are you injured? Do you need medical attention? No, ma'am, Sarah replied. maintaining her cover identity while trying to assess the Major's true motivations. "Just a little shaken up, but I'm fine." "Good. I want you to report to my office in 1 hour for debriefing about this incident. And I want a complete account of everything that happened here today." The Major's eyes swept over the other soldiers, her expression leaving no doubt about her displeasure. "As for the rest of you, consider yourselves confined to quarters pending a full investigation." As the soldiers began to file out of the training facility, Sarah realized that her mission had reached a critical juncture. The cover that had taken months to establish was now at risk. But she had also stumbled onto evidence of systematic murder, disguised as training accidents. The question now was whether Major, whoever she was, would be an ally or an enemy in uncovering the truth about what was really happening at Camp Thunder Ridge. The Major approached Sarah as the last of the soldiers left the room. "What's your name, soldier?" "Martin, ma'am. Sam Martin." "Well, Martin, you're either very lucky or very skilled to have survived what just happened here. Based on the condition of that equipment, you should be dead right now." Sarah met the Major's gaze steadily, trying to read what was behind the woman's professional facade. "Thank you for intervening, ma'am. I don't think I would have made it across that rope." "No, you wouldn't have. And I suspect that was exactly what someone was hoping for." The Major paused, studying Sarah's face with an intensity that made her wonder if her cover was still intact. "Tell me, Martin, what do you know about the other recruits who have been stationed here recently?" The question confirmed Sarah's suspicions that the Major was aware of larger problems at the facility. This could be the break she needed to gather more intelligence, or it could be a test to see how much she knew about the conspiracy she was investigating. "Not much, ma'am. I just arrived today. But some of the soldiers mentioned that several recruits had washed out recently. They seemed to think it was funny." The Major's expression darkened further. "Funny? Yes, I'm sure they did." She glanced around the training facility one more time, her eyes cataloging the various modifications that had been made to standard equipment. "Martin, I'm going to ask you to do something that may seem unusual. I want you to trust me for the next few hours while I sort out exactly what's been happening here. Can you do that?" Sarah nodded, though every instinct told her to be cautious. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Because I have a feeling that your arrival here today may have prevented not just your own death, but potentially many others as well." The Major headed toward the door, then paused to look back at Sarah. 1 hour. My office. And Martin? Watch your back until then. I don't think everyone here is going to be happy that you survived today's training session." Sarah spent the hour before her meeting with the Major carefully observing the base around her. The soldiers who had been present during her training session were nowhere to be seen. But she noticed increased activity among the security personnel, and several hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when she passed by. Something was definitely happening. And she suspected her near-death experience had triggered events that went far beyond a simple training accident investigation. As she made her way to the Major's office, Sarah noticed surveillance cameras that she hadn't spotted during her initial reconnaissance. The security presence at Camp Thunder Ridge was far more extensive than appropriate for a standard training facility. This suggested either that the base was handling classified operations, or that someone wanted very tight control over what happened here, and who might witness it. The Major's office was located in the administrative building, behind a door marked with a simple nameplate reading, Major Patricia Hayes. Sarah knocked and entered when called, finding herself in a spartanly furnished room that revealed little about its occupant beyond military efficiency. Major Hayes gestured for Sarah to take a seat across from her desk. Instead of beginning with questions about the training incident, she surprised Sarah by asking, "Tell me, Martin, what did you think of your fellow soldiers today?" The question was clearly a test, though Sarah wasn't entirely sure what Major Hayes was testing for. "They seemed to take their training seriously, ma'am. Maybe a little too seriously." "That's an interesting way to put it." Major Hayes leaned back in her chair, studying Sarah with the same intensity she had shown in the training facility. "How much do you know about the mission of this facility?" "Just what I was told during orientation, ma'am. Advanced training for soldiers selected for special operations." "And what weren't you told?" Sarah hesitated. sensing that this conversation was moving into territory that could either expose her cover or provide crucial intelligence for her mission. "I'm not sure I understand, ma'am." Major Hayes opened a folder on her desk and pulled out several photographs. She turned them around so Sarah could see them clearly. Each photograph showed a young soldier in dress uniform, the kind of formal portrait typically taken for military records or to send home to family. "These are the recruits who have been stationed here over the past 6 months," Major Hayes said quietly. "Do you know what they all have in common?" Sarah studied the faces in the photographs, trying to understand what she was supposed to see. The soldiers were diverse in age and ethnicity, both male and female, representing various backgrounds and military specialties. "They're all young, ma'am. Early in their careers." "Yes, but more than that. They were all selected for this facility based on specific criteria that had nothing to do with their military skills or potential for advancement." Major Hayes paused, watching Sarah's reaction carefully. They were all selected because they came from families with limited political connections, minimal financial resources, and most importantly, because they had asked uncomfortable questions about military operations they had witnessed or been ordered to participate in. The implication hit Sarah like a physical blow. Camp Thunder Ridge wasn't a training facility at all. It was an elimination center, designed to permanently silence soldiers who had become inconvenient for someone higher up the chain of command. "Ma'am, are you saying these soldiers were murdered?" "I'm saying they were transferred to this facility and subsequently died in what were reported as training accidents. Until today, I didn't have proof that the accidents were being deliberately arranged." Major Hayes gathered the photographs and placed them back in the folder. "Your near-death experience this afternoon was the evidence I needed to confirm my suspicions." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized how close she had come to becoming another photograph in Major Hayes's collection. "How many, ma'am?" 14 confirmed deaths in 6 months, all reported as accidents during training exercises, all involving equipment failures or environmental hazards that subsequent investigations attributed to poor maintenance or simple bad luck. "Who's responsible?" Major Hayes was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see the weight of whatever knowledge she carried. "That's what I've been trying to determine for the past 3 months. The orders for these transfers come from high enough in the command structure that I can't simply arrest the immediate perpetrators and expect the problem to be solved." Sarah realized she was at a crossroads in her mission. She could continue maintaining her cover and try to gather intelligence independently, or she could trust Major Hayes and potentially gain a powerful ally in exposing the conspiracy. The decision would determine not only the success of her mission but potentially the lives of future soldiers who might be targeted for elimination. "Ma'am, I need to tell you something important." Before Sarah could continue, an alarm began sounding throughout the base. Major Hayes immediately grabbed her radio and barked a series of questions to the communications center. The responses she received clearly alarmed her. "We have a problem," she told Sarah, standing up from her desk. 3 vehicles full of military police just entered the base, and they're heading directly for this building. Either someone has discovered our conversation, or they've decided that the incident this afternoon requires a more permanent solution than originally planned. Sarah's mind raced as she evaluated the rapidly changing situation. If the arrival of military police was related to her investigation, it meant that her cover had been compromised, and that someone with significant authority was moving to shut down any inquiry into the activities at Camp Thunder Ridge. "Ma'am, I think it's time I told you who I really am." Major Hayes turned to stare at her, clearly sensing that whatever Sarah was about to reveal would change everything. "Go ahead, Martin, or whoever you really are." "Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, Navy SEALs. I'm here on an undercover investigation into reports of missing recruits and suspicious training accidents." For a moment, Major Hayes said nothing, processing this revelation and its implications. Then she moved quickly to her desk, pulled out a secure phone, and began dialing a number from memory. "This is Hayes. Authorization code Delta 77 Alpha. I need immediate extraction for a naval intelligence operative and myself. Location Camp Thunder Ridge. We have confirmation of the elimination protocol and immediate threats incoming." She listened to the response, then continued, "Negative. Standard extraction won't work. We need full tactical support. These people have been killing soldiers for months, and they're not going to let us walk away with evidence." As Major Hayes completed her call, Sarah could hear vehicles stopping outside the building and the sound of armed personnel taking positions around the perimeter. Whatever was about to happen, they were running out of time to escape or defend themselves. "How much evidence do you have?" Sarah asked, moving to the window to assess their tactical situation. "Enough to bring down at least a dozen people in the command structure, possibly including someone at the Pentagon level. But only if we can get it to the right people without being stopped by the wrong ones." Sarah evaluated their position with professional efficiency. The building offered limited defensive options, but she had noticed during her earlier reconnaissance that it connected to an underground tunnel system used for utilities and communications. If they could reach those tunnels before the incoming forces secured the building, they might be able to evade capture long enough for the extraction team to reach them. "Major, do you know about the tunnel access in the basement of this building?" Hayes looked surprised. "How did you know about that?" "Professional habit. I always map escape routes when I'm in potentially hostile territory." Sarah moved away from the window as she spotted armed figures positioning themselves with clear fields of fire. "We need to move now, before they complete their perimeter." Major Hayes grabbed the folder of evidence and a laptop computer from her desk, then led Sarah toward a door she hadn't noticed earlier. Behind it was a stairway that led down to the building's basement level, where the building's mechanical systems were housed. As they descended, Sarah could hear the sound of the main entrance to the building being breached. Voices echoed from above, coordinating a systematic search of the facility. Professional soldiers conducting a military operation, not law enforcement making arrests. "This isn't about justice," Sarah realized aloud. "This is about silencing witnesses, which is why I've been so careful about who I trusted with my suspicions," Major Hayes replied, leading her through the basement toward a maintenance access that connected to the tunnel system. "Half the command structure here is compromised, and I wasn't sure how high up the conspiracy reached." They entered the tunnel system just as the sounds of the search reached the basement above them. Sarah's SEAL training kicked in automatically as she evaluated their route options and potential defensive positions. The tunnels were well maintained and offered multiple paths across the base, but they would also be obvious escape routes that any competent search team would cover. "Where's the extraction point?" she asked Major Hayes as they moved through the tunnels. 2 miles north of the base, at a communications facility that's supposed to be abandoned. My contact said they would have people there within 30 minutes of my call." Sarah checked her watch. They had been moving for about 10 minutes, which meant they needed to cover 2 miles of potentially hostile territory in 20 minutes, while avoiding capture by forces that knew the base layout better than they did. As they reached a junction in the tunnel system, Sarah heard something that made her grab Major Hayes and pull her into the shadows. Voices were echoing from one of the connecting passages, getting closer rapidly. "They're in the tunnels," she whispered. "Multiple contacts, moving systematically." Major Hayes nodded grimly. "There's another way out, but it's riskier. Emergency exit that comes up near the perimeter fence. But if they have the base surrounded, we might be walking into an ambush. Better than being trapped down here," Sarah replied, making the tactical decision that would determine their fate. "Lead the way." They moved deeper into the tunnel system, toward an emergency exit that Major Hayes hoped would be unguarded. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, as their hunters realized they had found the trail. As they approached the emergency exit, Sarah realized that everything that had happened since her arrival at Camp Thunder Ridge had been leading to this moment. Her mission to investigate missing recruits had uncovered a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military command. Now she and Major Hayes were carrying evidence that could expose systematic murder disguised as training accidents. The emergency exit led to a concealed opening near the perimeter fence, just as Major Hayes had indicated. But as they emerged from the tunnels, Sarah immediately spotted the telltale signs that the area was under surveillance. Movement in the tree line, unnatural shadows that suggested positioned personnel, and most tellingly, the absence of normal base security in an area that should have been heavily patrolled. "It's a trap," she told Major Hayes. "They knew we'd come this way." Before Major Hayes could respond, spotlights blazed to life around them, illuminating their position and destroying any chance of concealment. Armed figures emerged from positions throughout the area, weapons trained on them with professional precision. "Lieutenant Martinez," called a voice from behind one of the spotlights. "Or should I call you Sam Martin? You can drop the act now. We know exactly who you are and why you're here." Sarah raised her hands slowly, but her mind was still working at full capacity, evaluating options and looking for any advantage that might allow them to escape, or at least ensure that the evidence Major Hayes carried would reach the right people. "The question," continued the voice, "is whether you're going to cooperate with the necessary cleanup of this situation, or whether you're going to force us to add 2 more training accidents to our records." That was when Sarah made the decision that would define not only her own fate, but the future of every soldier who might otherwise become a target of the conspiracy she had uncovered. Instead of surrendering, she did what her SEAL training had prepared her to do in impossible situations. She fought back. "Major Hayes," she called out clearly, "remember what I told you about who I really am, and remember that SEALs never surrender." Then Sarah Martinez, decorated Navy SEAL, dropped her disguise forever and showed everyone present exactly what 8 years of elite military training could accomplish when survival was on the line.